Imagine you're walking through this lush, incredibly dense Javanese jungle, right? It's maybe 1,200 years ago, and you are just completely surrounded by wildlife.
Oh, yeah. Monkeys in the trees, wild pigs in the brush.
Exactly. But then there's a twist. You aren't actually in a real jungle at all.
Right.
You are walking the stone corridors of the Borobudur Temple in central Java, and you are completely surrounded by this 1,200-year-old stone zoo that's just carved right into the volcanic rock.
It is just a staggering piece of architecture. Most people, when they look at Borobudur, they just see this massive tiered religious pyramid.
Well, a Buddhist monument.
Right, but if you actually know how to read the stone, you realize that there are thousands of these intricate relief panels wrapping around the corridors. And historically, sure, the focus has almost entirely been on its religious significance.
Sure.
But the sheer volume, biological data encoded in those carvings, it represents an entirely different kind of historical text.
Which brings us perfectly to the mission for this deep dive. Because our stack of sources today, it pulls from historical journals detailing the ancient Mataram kingdom, modern zoological analyses of the temple's reliefs, and even recent marine conservation reports.
Yeah, it's a really diverse stack of research.
It totally is. And we are going to decode this massive 9th century Buddhist monument, not just as a religious artifact, but, as a brilliant biological field guide, a record of ancient human survival, and surprisingly, a working blueprint for modern sustainability.
And that's what we want to share with you today. Because the ancient Javanese people, they left us this highly complex puzzle. We are literally still actively using the data they carved into those walls to solve modern ecological problems today.
I promise you, this journey is going to completely change how you view ancient art. But before we can even begin to understand how humans operated within this ancient world, we really have to understand the environment itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because the artisans who carved this temple, they captured their local ecosystem with this level of scientific precision that is just difficult to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it's shocking. Just to grasp the sheer scale of what they recorded, you really only have to look at one section, the Lolita Vistara section.
That's right, which is the section that tells the story of the Buddha across this long series of panels.
Exactly. Borobudur has something like 1,416 narrative panels in total. But researchers recently isolated just those Lolita Vistara reliefs.
And what did they find?
Well, from just 131 individual animal carvings in that single section alone, modern zoologists, were able to successfully identify 23 distinct mammal species.
Wow, 23.
Yeah. And they aren't just like rough approximations. They are perfectly taxonomically identifiable.
Okay, let's unpack this because, if you ask me to draw an elephant from memory right now, it's basically going to look like a gray refrigerator with a hose attached to it.
Right, exactly. Just a big blob.
Yeah. But these carvers, they captured the Asian elephant Elephas maximus down to the literal bone structure.
They really did.
They perfectly carved the twin domes on the top of the elephant's head, which is, a very specific anatomical marker. And they even captured the exact biomechanics of how the joints bear weight when the animal moves.
It's insane. Which, it begs the question, what is the payoff for that level of biological accuracy?
Right.
Like, why would a king commission artisans to spend thousands of man-hours capturing the precise joint movement of an elephant without modern tools?
What's fascinating here is that to the carvers, accuracy was an expression of their deep connection to their bioregion. They weren't just copying from some reference book, right?
Yeah, they didn't have encyclopedias.
Exactly. They were translating daily firsthand observation directly into stone.
Yeah.
They didn't just carve static animal shapes. They actually carved behavior, and they carved habitat.
Yes, the habitat stuff blew my mind.
You can see this dedication to ecological niches most vividly in how they handled the primates.
I was looking at that exact thing in the zoological studies. They didn't just default to some generic monkey template. They took the time to meticulously differentiate between the long-tailed macaque, the Macaca fascicularis, and the Javan langur, which is known locally as the lutung buding.
Right.
And it's not just that they gave them different physical features, they actually mapped out entirely different behavioral patterns across the surface of the walls.
That spatial arrangement is just incredible. When you find the macaques on the reliefs, they are almost always depicted in these large, chaotic troops.
Yeah, running all over the place.
Exactly. And the carvers deliberately positioned them near water sources or down on the ground level of the panels, which is a perfect reflection of their real-life biology.
Because they're ground foragers.
Yes, macaques are terrestrial river edge foragers. They come down out of the trees to hunt for crabs and shrimp along the riverbanks.
But then you contrast that with the Lutong Buding, the langurs. They are carved in completely different neighborhoods of the stone. Instead of large groups scrambling on the ground, the langurs are depicted in much smaller numbers, usually just like pairs. And the artisans specifically place them high up in the intricately carved stone tree canopies.
Which perfectly mirrors their biological reality. They are arboreal leaf eaters.
Yeah.
They stay high in the trees and live in these really tight family units.
It's like they baked functional ecology into a religious structure.
They really did. They're showing you not just what lived in the jungle, but exactly how the jungle operated as a layered system.
Yeah.
You have the ground scavengers, the canopy dwellers, the apex herbivores.
Which makes total logical sense. You walk the corridors, you see the textbook anatomy of the elephant, the foraging behavior of the macaque. You have this absolute strict commitment to observational science.
Right.
But then you turn a corner expecting to see, I don't know, a wild pig or a deer, and you come face to face with an impossible monster.
Yes. The biological ledger suddenly just ruptures. You encounter these creatures that defy all taxonomic logic.
Guarding the stairways, you have this thing called Makara. And it is just this massive hallucinatory chimera. It has the curled, muscular trunk of an elephant, the crushing jaw of a crocodile, and the tail of a fish.
It's terrifying.
Completely. And if you look up toward the upper sections, you find the Kinnara and Kinnari. These are creatures carved with the detailed upper torso of a human being, but they're fused to the lower body, legs, and wings of a bird.
It's quite a shift.
It's jarring. If these artisans knew the exact bone structure of a macaque, why suddenly glue a crocodile jaw to an elephant trunk? Why mix strict science with wild fantasy?
Well, this raises a really important question about how ancient cultures categorized reality. See, we look at the world today through this very post-Enlightenment lens.
Right.
We draw a hard, impenetrable line between biology and mythology. But the ancient Javanese, they didn't operate with that boundary at all. To them, ecology wasn't purely physical, it was spiritual.
Okay, so the physical animals, like the macaques, they represent the physical world they interacted with daily.
Precisely. The deer, the monkeys, the elephants, they often populated the Buddhist Jataka tales carved into the walls.
And those are the moral stories about the Buddha's past lives, right?
Exactly. So the real physical animals taught moral lessons about how to behave in the physical realm. But the mythological creatures, they represented raw, elemental forces that were entirely beyond human control.
Oh, that is fascinating. Okay, let's look at the Makara through that lens. It's an elephant, a crocodile, and a fish. The common denominator there is obviously water.
Yes, the Makara is the ultimate embodiment of the terrifying, life-giving power of water. In ancient Java, water management was literally everything.
Because of the agriculture.
Right. It brought the monsoon rains that fed the agricultural systems, but those exact same monsoons brought devastating floods. And the rivers themselves were just full of lethal predators.
So they combined the most intense parts of all those water animals.
Exactly. They took the apex traits of known water-associated animals, the size of the elephant, the lethality of the crocodile, the aquatic mastery of the fish, and they engineered this ultimate spiritual guardian. It symbolized both the vital necessity and the extreme danger of that element.
Wow. So the chimera isn't a failure of biology. It's just a completely different classification system.
Exactly.
And I guess the Kinnara, being half-bird, represents the celestial realm, you know, the element of air.
You've got it.
It's so easy to look at the strict separation of the physical and spiritual ecosystems and think of the Mataram Kingdom citizens as just like passive philosophers.
Oh, definitely.
But they weren't just observing these animals to carve them, they were actively hunting them. Their daily survival depended on knowing exactly where those macaques foraged or where the wild pigs rooted.
Which perfectly brings us to the human element.
Yeah.
The Mataram people lived inside this massive ecosystem, and they had to extract resources from it to survive. But figuring out the mechanics of that extraction, that requires a deep dive into the historical methodology itself.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because to prove how an ancient Javanese society organized something as fundamental as bird hunting, modern researchers couldn't just look at one source.
No, they had to triangulate.
Right. They had to fuse 3 completely different types of evidence. A 3D stone carving, a 9th century tax document, and literally a Chinese emperor's gift receipt.
It is a masterful piece of historical detective work. Because think about it, the reliefs give us visual data, but they completely lack administrative context.
Yeah, a picture doesn't tell you the laws.
Exactly. The inscriptions give us the administrative rules, but they lack the imagery. And the foreign records show us the macroeconomic trade routes. When you layer all three of those together, the actual mechanics of the ancient economy reveal themselves.
So let's start with the visual data, the weapons on the walls. The stone reliefs show hunters tracking wild pigs, which were known as seleng, using this specific iron-tipped spear called a gala.
Right.
And in other panels, you see them aiming up at the canopy using a tulip, which is a traditional blowpipe, to hunt birds.
The mechanics of the tulip are so fascinating to me. Using a blowpipe requires immense stealth and a really deep understanding of the canopy structure.
Because you have to get so close.
Exactly. You have to get incredibly close to the target without disturbing the foliage. And the carvings often actually show hunters following up with a club, just to ensure the catch is secured after the dart hits.
Okay, so looking at the reliefs, I totally understand the physical act of the hunt. But hunting a wild pig for your local village is one thing. Scaling that up to a kingdom-wide economy is something else entirely.
Oh, yeah, that requires massive organization.
Right. You need infrastructure and oversight. Did the Mataram Kingdom actually regulate this, or was it just a decentralized free-for-all in the jungle?
It was highly, highly regulated, and the sources point specifically to the Telong inscription, which is dated to 825 Saka, so the early 10th century.
Okay.
This document reveals that hunting was a structured, taxable profession. There were specific, specialized titles for the hunters. Well, for instance, Mamangkat Wungkudu was the official title for someone who hunted birds using nets or traps.
Wow, an official title just for that.
Yep. And Manuhab Manik was the title for someone who hunted using the blowpipes depicted on the walls.
And the government actively taxed these specific professions. But what I find so wild is how they allocated that revenue, because the inscription actually states that the taxes collected from hunting wild animals were used to fund the maintenance of holy buildings and to pay for the upkeep of river crossings.
It seems like a weird connection at first, right?
Totally. Why connect religious buildings and river ferries to hunting taxes?
Well, think about the geography of Java. It is a landscape dominated by dense jungle and massive shifting rivers. If you are extracting resources from the deep forest like meat, feathers, live animals, you have to transport those goods to the population centers.
Ah, of course.
You need reliable river crossings, bridges, and ferries. The state recognized that the exploitation of the wild ecosystem had to literally pay for the infrastructure required to move those exact goods.
That makes perfect sense.
The physical hunt directly funded the logistical and spiritual architecture of the kingdom.
But the logistics, they go far beyond just local river crossings. The Mataram Kingdom wasn't just trading within its own borders.
No, not at all.
The foreign records, specifically from the Tang and Song dynasties in China, show that Javanese rulers regularly sent exotic animal tributes to the Chinese emperors as, diplomatic gifts.
Right.
And one of the most highly prized items on those shipping manifests was exotic parrots.
Which is the crucial piece of this whole puzzle. Because parrots are not native to the Javanese jungle.
Wait, really?
No, they are native to places much further east, like Papua.
Oh, wow. It's like an ancient Amazon fulfillment center.
Essentially, yes. Java was operating as the centralized hub.
That's crazy. To get a Papuan parrot to a Tang dynasty emperor, you have to capture it in Papua, transport it thousands of miles west, across open ocean to Java.
Keep it alive in a royal menagerie.
Yes. Keep it alive, and then put it on another massive maritime voyage north across the South China Sea. The infrastructure required to keep a delicate bird alive across those ancient trade winds is just staggering.
It really implies a complex, deeply integrated maritime trade network operating centuries before what we consider modern globalization. They were absolute masters of their terrestrial environment, but they were equally adept at navigating the broader oceanic environment.
So they are managing this massive terrestrial and maritime trade network. But what about their aquatic food supply?
Like rivers.
Yeah, because while they were hunting the forests and trading across oceans, the way they gathered food from their own local rivers that is sending absolute ripples into modern environmental science.
It really is. It turns out the Borobudur Temple serves as a masterclass in modern sustainability.
It's hard to believe.
When researchers analyze the reliefs detailing aquatic life and fishing, they basically see three primary methods depicted. You have the woo-woo, which are woven bamboo traps. You have pantsing, which are traditional hooks and lines. And then you have hala, which are large casting nets.
Let's look at the mechanics of those tools, because I mean, any marine biologist will tell you that the fishing gear you use dictates the health of the entire ecosystem.
Exactly.
The bamboo traps, the woo-woo, they're woven in a funnel shape. You place them in the river current, fish swim in, but the design is highly selective.
Right, because of the gaps in the bamboo.
Exactly. If a fish is too small, it can just escape through the woven gaps. And if you pull the trap up and find a species you don't want, you simply toss it back alive. You extract food while maintaining the biological balance.
The hala, however, operates on a completely different principle.
Right.
A casting net is weighted at the edges. You throw it, it sinks, and you dragged up literally everything in its path. Big fish, small fry, breeding stock, bycatch, all of it.
It's basically a vacuum.
Yes. It is completely non-selective. It inherently strips the environment and leads to severe overfishing.
And the ancient artisans seemingly understood the physical consequences of the kala perfectly, and they actually encoded that ecological data into a spiritual warning.
They really did. At the hidden base of the temple, there's a section called the Karma Vibhanga reliefs.
The karma section.
Exactly. These panels are dedicated entirely to the law of cause and effect, the actions you take in this life, and the specific rewards or punishments you receive in the next.
And in panel 109 of this karma section, you literally see a group of men fishing using a jala, the casting net.
Yep.
And right next to that scene, visually linked as a direct consequence, is a depiction of people being tortured and boiled in cauldrons in the underworld.
Very graphic.
It is. Using a non-selective net to catch fish is explicitly categorized alongside mortal sins that condemn you to hell.
But conversely, if you look at panels 1 or 118, you see communities fishing using the woo-woo, the selective bamboo traps, or using the pantsing hooks.
And what happens to them?
Nothing. Those scenes are depicted as peaceful, normal, daily activities with absolutely zero spiritual punishment attached to them.
So, what does this all mean? I struggle a bit with assigning our 21st century climate anxiety to 9th century fishermen, you know?
I hear you.
Like, wait, are you telling me that a 9th century temple was actively advocating against overfishing by threatening bad karma? Were they boiling people in cauldrons in these carvings because they possessed a genuine modern sense of ocean conservation? Or was this purely about preserving the king's food supply? Are we just projecting our own environmental fears onto ancient rocks?
It's a fair question. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the distinction between conservation and food supply just didn't exist for them.
Okay, how so?
Well, sustainability isn't some modern luxury born out of climate anxiety. To them, it was an ancient, brutal survival mechanism.
Ah, I see.
The Javanese intimately understood the carrying capacity of their rivers. They knew that dragging a net pulls out the breeding stock. It destroys tomorrow's food supply for a quick meal today.
Which is a death sentence for a community.
Exactly. Taking too much from the environment unbalanced the physical world, which meant it inherently unbalanced the spiritual world. It was a spiritual offense precisely because it threatened the physical survival of the community.
That is just incredible. And the most amazing part of this entire deep dive is that right now, today, researchers and educators at Indonesian universities are actively bringing photographs of these specific Borobudur reliefs into modern fishing communities.
Yes. It's such a brilliant initiative.
They are using a 9th century stone carving to teach modern, sustainable fishing practices to local fishermen. They are pointing to the walls and saying, look, our ancestors mapped this out 1,000 years ago. Traps are harmony, nets are destruction.
It is a profound demonstration of how data can survive. Think about it. The ancients observed the mechanics of their world. They encoded that wisdom in stone to outlast their own kingdom. And the millennium later, scientists are reading that exact same ledger to try and save our current ecosystems.
It's beautiful, really.
It is. Knowledge is most valuable when it is understood and applied across generations.
It fundamentally changes how you look at a pile of carved volcanic rock. Borobudur isn't just a monument.
No.
It is a precise biological ledger mapping the behavior of macaques and langurs. It's a museum of elemental chimeras warning of the monsoon. It is a permanent record of taxation and maritime trade routes stretching all the way from the jungles of Papua to the courts of China.
And perhaps most urgently, it is a guide for sustainable living that we are really just now fully remembering how to read. I would encourage you, the listener, to really think about how you interact with the physical and spiritual ecosystem around you.
Yeah.
It is so easy to feel removed from the natural world when you live in a concrete city, but we are just as dependent on the carrying capacity of our environment today as the people who carved those walls were 1,200 years ago.
That is a crucial point, and it leaves me with one final lingering thought.
Okay.
Imagine a future civilization, say 1,000 years from now.
Right.
If they uncovered a massive monument detailing the mechanics of our civilization today,